Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you're tuning in from. My name is John Fisher. I'm with LifeLab in Santa Cruz, California, and I'm part of the School Garden Support Organization-Network. Today, we're going to be talking about school garden regional support models, or larger SGSOs, and how we plan the work that we do related to supporting multiple school gardens. So folks are still coming in through the waiting room. We'll get started in one moment. Thanks for joining us. All right, it's great to see folks coming on into our meeting. So once again, my name is John Fisher. I'm with LifeLab in the School Garden Support Organization-Network. And today we're going to be talking about larger school garden support organizations or regional support models and some frameworks of how we could plan the work that we do. So a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this, and a recording will be shared via email and on our webpage. Please throughout share your questions and answers to help out your peers in the chat. So Q&A is definitely welcome and encouraged in the chat for relevant topics. We will have opportunities to ask questions as well, and we'll ask you to unmute and share via questions and or share examples or case studies of your work. We do have a planning template that was shared in to you all as part of the registration, and we are going to be revisiting this planning template momentarily. So we'll put that in the chat so you can see it's a very basic planning template to list your activities. And then at the end, or whenever you have to jump off, if you could visit our feedback form at bit.ly/SGSO-feedback, that'd be very appreciative. We like to read that feedback, share it with our presenters, and plan and improve our webinars as we continue to offer these monthly. So today we will start with a very brief intro to the SGSO network, set you in a breakout room for you to connect with your peers and share the work you do supporting multiple school gardens, or it might give you time to use that planning template to write down some of your activities. Then we're going to share some examples of framework that larger SGSOs use to dictate or plan their work. And then we'll continue by sharing your voices and have discussion around activities that we all do as SGSOs. And I do want to just say that what we do as SGSOs are varied very greatly in the types of things that we do, depending on the scale and where you're doing your work. So very brief introduction, the School Garden Support Organization-Network was founded in 2020. We're a peer-to-peer organization, and really our goal is to share best practices among each other. We do that through webinars, in-person gatherings, and web-based resources. Something exciting that we're working on, we're partnering, the SGSO Network's partnering with LifeLab and the Sprouts Healthy Communities Foundation to offer the first National School Garden Summit. It's going to be April 22nd through 25th in Denver, Colorado. This is 2 years in the making since 2021 was canceled or rescheduled to 2022, and lets you know that scholarships are open until November 30th and registration is open. So you can check out that website there to learn more, and we hope to see some of you in Denver. All right, so what we're going to do now is get you all into your breakout rooms. We're going to have about 4 people per breakout room. And when you're in there, we'll have about 10 minutes. And we want you just to share your name, briefly name, location, org, the scale of where you operate. You might be operating a state. You might be working within a school district. You might be working with 4 school gardens. So share your scale. And then the discussion topic for you all to share briefly is, what are you doing successfully in the work that you're doing to support multiple school gardens? So for example, I could say in the network that I help, we in Santa Cruz County, we have about 28 school gardens, and about 16 to 20 of us gather twice a year. And those have been consistent gatherings, and that is a successful thing that we do. So with that, I'm going to let Tristana put you into breakout rooms. You'll get an invitation to say, yes, I want to be in a breakout room. And those that don't make it into breakout room, we'll see you in the main room here. But hopefully you all are successful to make it into a breakout room. So see you again in about 10 minutes. Looks like it's happening. Breakout rooms are happening. It's like everybody's made it back into the main room, and we're going to continue on with our agenda here. So the slide you're looking at right now is taken from what you all shared in your registration, or 188 folks that registered as of Monday or Tuesday. I pulled this data, and these are topics that we will return to at the end, time willing, to discuss these topics, because these are the topics that you are all most interested in learning about. So maintaining multiple school gardens, training educators, providing instructional material, communication tools like newsletters, managing your members, and providing instruction at school sites. So if you do have questions or resources related to these throughout, we'll be addressing them through our case studies, but then at the end we'll return and focus on these topics. With that, I just wanted to put a plug for that. We'll return to discussing these. Some of these will be discussed as we move forward. If you do have great resources to share, please do so directly in the chat. And I'll be sharing resources related to these as well in the chat. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sam Ullery, who works in Washington, D.C., to manage their school garden program. And he's going to share both about the work he does and a planning framework that they adopted to support the multiple school gardens that they have. Thanks, Sam.
Great. Thank you so much, John. And hi, everybody. It is always a pleasure to be surrounded by like-minded people. And these are just always inspirational webinars. And I'm just honored to be a part of it. So thanks for having me. We had a great conversation in our small group, and it made me even more excited about today's webinar. I'm looking forward to learning from you all. So my name is Sam Ullery, and I work in Washington, D.C. I work for the local government for the District of Columbia in the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, which is our state education office here in D.C. And I have the honor and pleasure of supporting the school gardens in the District of Columbia, and I've been doing this for about 10 years. And just a little overview of our program, and then I'm going to get into talking about the framework. We do support pretty large number of schools with garden programs, which is supported through legislation, through a sugar-sweetened beverage tax, which goes to funding lots of different aspects of the school garden program, but also school food, recycling, composting, other things. And we currently, this was school year 1920, supported about 14,000 students that were engaged in 10 or more hours of garden-based learning, and 787 teachers that incorporated at least 5 garden-based lessons into their existing teaching practice. And we often are able to give out funds in the form of competitive grants to support school gardens, particularly staffing of the school garden, since we've identified that as the biggest need. And overall, we are looking to increase the number of students that are in high quality garden, school garden programs here in DC. All right, so why are we talking about frameworks? Well, we asked you all during the registration if you had a planning framework, whether or not you had one, and if you did, which one you used. And many of you are not using a framework to support school gardens. And so I'm really excited about that, because I think that there's some opportunity here to have that conversation and really think about whether or not a framework will be useful, and if so, what type of framework. And specifically today, I'll be talking about this framework called an MTSS framework, which stands for Multi-Tier Systems of Support. And it's a triangle. And it's actually adopted, well, it first showed up in the education sector, specifically for behavior support for students. Schools, you'll often see them using this model as a way to identify, support, and help kids around like behavior and social emotional challenges. We're applying this model here in Washington, D.C. To the School Gardens program, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. It is there's a lot of research and data out there that supports this model as an effective strategy framework for organizing how you provide services. So I use the word services synonymous with activities. So either services or activities to school gardens. So in the breakout group, we were talking about lots of different activities that we're doing. And those activities can fit into this framework and help you more effectively provide support. I started using this framework a couple of years ago because I was feeling very overwhelmed. We have, as I mentioned, 110 schools with garden programs, and it's a lot. It's just me. I don't have a staff. We don't have a lot of capacity to provide support. And this framework has really changed the way that I am able to provide support to school gardens. I think it's been a game changer for me, and I really want to share it with you all. So we're going to go through the different tiers. As you can see from this triangle, tier 1 is the largest tier. It is focused on everyone in your audience that you're trying to support. Tier 2 is a smaller group of those people, so some of those people. And then tier 3 would be very few. And if you want to talk percentages, it's about 80, 15, 5%. So 80% in tier 1, 15% of your target population should be impacted by tier 2, and then just about 5% in tier 3. And those are just rough numbers. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And let's go into tier 1. So tier 1 is where I spend most of my time and energy. Tier 1 is really the foundation of everything that I do. I spend probably about 75%, 80% of my time focused on activities in the tier 1 category. So when we're talking about tier 1 and really any of the tiers, we're really talking about who the audience is that you're trying to deliver your activities to. And so for tier 1, it's everybody. So for me, my audience is pretty broad. It's all the teachers in Washington, D.C. It is all of the community-based organizations that support school gardens, okay? And to a lesser degree, but kind of indirectly, all the students. All right, so anything I do in tier 1 must be available to them and directly related to their work. All right, and then the other thing about tier 1 is even though I spend most of my time in tier 1, the individual activities should require minimal work each time. So an example is a newsletter. Let's go to the next slide. So a newsletter is one of my activities, okay? It's dissemination of the e-newsletter in the activities column. So that newsletter goes out monthly, and I have a template, and we have a process for putting that out each month. It takes me, probably like a couple hours to put together the newsletter from start to finish. That's a very small amount of time and energy that I put into that newsletter each month. But that newsletter goes out to everybody. Again, this is a tier 1 activity. It's meant for the broader audience. But I do lots of different activities in here. I do a school guard. I have a technical document called a school garden guide that is, again, I update it maybe 2 or 3 times a year. It takes very little time. It's available to everybody. And I have a web page. Again, it gets updated quarterly, doesn't take a whole lot of time. So these three activities, the school garden guide, the newsletter, and the web page, that answers probably about all the questions that about 80% of the people that I support have. They go to they read the e-newsletter and they say, great, that's all I need. I needed like a grant to apply for, or you know, training that I can attend. Or they go to the web page and they get, that's all the information they need. And that's it. That's their interaction with the Aussie School Gardens program, and they've been supported. People that look at the web page or go to the school garden guide and they say, you know what, I need more information. This is not enough. Then we go to tier 2. So let's talk about tier 2 now. Tier 2 is, again, it's a targeted audience. It's a smaller group of people. And based on the impact that tier 1 had. So we know tier 1, that newsletter wasn't enough for that person. They need more. They want to go to a training now, or they want to apply for a grant. Those, then they would be in the tier 2. So the key here that I really want to hone in on here is that the people that are in the tier, your audience, your tier 2 audience, are only people that have not had all of their questions answered and been given the support they need in tier 1. So they go to tier 2. All right. Again, and then tier 2 is less, requires more time because you're providing a deeper dive, more energy and maybe funding than tier 1, but it's less than tier 3. So it's like funding a training. Let's go to the next slide here. So these are my tier 2 activities, okay? And again, these are only for people where tier 1 wasn't enough. So they're going to apply for a school garden grant, or they're going to come to one of our monthly trainings, or they're going to send me an email and say, hey, how do you manage a composting system? And I'm going to give them some technical assistance, or they're going to come to our summer training. Okay, so these are people, these are a group, a subgroup of the broader universal audience that we're supporting. Okay, now for those people, tier 2 is not enough. They read the newsletter, they went to the web page, they read the school garden guide, they got a grant, they came to a bunch of trainings. Still, it's not enough. They still need more. That wasn't enough for them. Now it's tier 3. All right, so tier 3 is the next slide. Tier 3 is the highest amount of time. This takes the most amount of time. It's very intensive. This is individualized, intensive support for a small group of people, where tier 2 and tier 1, it just wasn't enough for them. So if we go to the next slide, these are some examples of these things. Are in-person meetings, like an in-person conversation with a community-based organization staff or a teacher, just to sit down, like really have that conversation, or on-site technical assistance where I would actually go out to the school and talk to them. Often for me, these are folks who are looking to start a new school garden. This is where kind of tier 1 and tier 2 is not enough. They really need you to come out, and they really need that additional hand-holding. So that is kind of how I structure my support that I provide to schools. And again, this has been really helpful because before the multi-tier systems of support framework, I was doing all these activities at the same time. And I was telling myself, I don't have enough time in the day to do all of these things. So now I focus on having a solid foundation. So the first thing I did was I did all my tier 1 activities. You can't have tier 2 and tier 3 without tier 1. Okay, so you have your tier 1 activities. I have my newsletter, my school garden guide. It's all ready to go, and then you build up. Then you do tier 2, and then you build up to tier 3. And so right now I'm like working on tier 3 because it's been a couple years. I feel good about tier 1 and tier 2. So I'm focused on that. Okay, that's it for me. I guess
Sam, there was a question.
now.
Yeah, there was a question in the chat about distinguishing your 80% of your time going to tier 1, but doing less capacity?
Oh yes, when I was saying that, I was thinking that's a little confusing. So let me clarify. I do more tier 1 activities. You saw I had 3 activities in the tier 1 category. And so because I have 4, because we also have a Google group as well, like a forum. So because I'm doing each of those activities requires less time individually, but because I do more of them than in the other tiers, it actually ends up taking a little bit more of my time. I might take back what I said, that it takes up 80% of my time in tier 1, and I would probably dial it back to maybe half of my time.
And there's a couple other questions in the chat. Yes, these slides will be shared. We'll share them in the follow-up email, but then there's 2 other questions, Sam, from Dawn and Brigitta.
Okay, let me look. Will you read them to me, or do I need to look at them?
Well, one, Dawn was wondering if you ever have recommended to people to get rid of their garden because you've been supporting them and they never really got it going. And then that was one question. And then the other question is, I think you should read the other question.
Okay, well, I will say, yes, I have recommended that people get rid of their garden. Especially gardens that are in the front of the school where it's very visible and it just kind of causes all kinds of problems. And I should say that, like, I also would say to that person, almost kind of like, what is the tier 1 kind of thing that you can do to kind of support the garden? Like, what's the minimal amount of work that you can do to keep it going? But yes, I have done that. And then, so a question is a tier 1 activity. So I have a tier 1 activity that's a newsletter. And yes, it does include information for all tiers. So the newsletter will give, it'll say, like, do you want technical assistance, which is a tier 3 activity? Send an email here and we'll follow up. Do you want to attend a training? Here's the registration. So yes, it does include all the tiers. Our grants kind of vary. Our school garden grants kind of vary. We in the past gone anywhere from $35,000 grants over a 2-year period of time to $15,000 for a 1 period of time, anywhere between $200,000 to $400,000 a year. It changes every year. Sorry, I'm trying to read the chat.
Yeah, I'll share. Bruce, you had a question about peer-to-peer support among schools. And I know many networks will open up a Google group just for their area. Like the Portland area has a farm and garden educator network. We, in our Santa Cruz County, we have a school garden network and we have a Google group. And we also have a peer-to-peer networking tool, which I'm going to share in the chat right now, but it's a space for folks to list their questions and strengths and then contacts for them to connect with one another. So we have seen that trying to get the garden educators together is successful among themselves of those that take initiative to make those connections.
So I'm reading this question. I think I understand it. So the question is kind of like, are tier 2 and tier 3 self-selected, or am I predetermining who those tiers are? And it's kind of both. So a good example is if we do a webinar like this I would consider a tier 1 webinar. This is open to anybody who wants to attend within our target group, right? And we're targeting schools that maintain multiple school gardens. This is a tier 1 webinar. But then if I were to say, like, hey, after this webinar, if anyone that teaches grade K through 5 wants to join me for a conversation, that would be a subgroup of this group. It would be only teachers K through 5. So you would self-select and you would say, yeah, I'm K through 5 teacher, I want to join, or no, that webinar was enough for me, I got everything I needed. out of it. So it's very much like we offer up all these supports. I tell everybody that there's tier 2 and about the tier 2 and tier 3 services, and then they determine whether or not they want to take that additional support. I think that's time. I want to make sure we don't run out of time, and let's move on. I'm happy, John, right? We can follow up and answer questions after the webinar, like this chat gets recorded, right?
Yep. And Sam, if some of these you can answer in the chat, I invite you to,
cool.
to make some clarifications in the chat. But otherwise, yeah, I feel we should move on to.
Okay, great. Yeah, so next, actually, this is a special surprise, and really lucky to have Renata Sloan with us today from the Wisconsin School Garden Network. She's the communications director there. She's an awesome person. If you don't know her, this is a treat to get to listen to her talk about the School Garden Network and Rooted, which is another initiative that she supports. So Renata, I'm going to pass it off to you, and I really look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks so much, Sam. That was quite the introduction. And thank you for teaching us about the tiers. Wisconsin School Garden Network, which I'm about to tell you more about, is going to undergo some strategic planning pretty soon. And I'm really excited to think about the ways that we can incorporate that, that framework. So I am going to turn my video off because I get distracted by it when I'm talking to folks, but I wanted you to be able to put a face to the voice if that's something that's helpful. So I am the communications director for the Wisconsin School Garden Network. Wisconsin School Garden Network is a partnership of Rooted, which is a Madison, Wisconsin-based nonprofit organization, where I am also the communications director, and of the UW-Madison Environmental Design Lab, which is in the Department of Planning and Landscape Architecture. We're funded through a 5-year community partnership program grant through the School of Medicine and Public Health. And we're in year 6 of our 5-year grant. We have a 1-year no cost extension. So we are transitioning this program into to be spread out among our partners, but I'm going to talk to you about what we've been working on and the framework that we've used. So we work using a theory of change to drive our work. And for people who are not familiar with theory of change, it's basically taking the big concept of the change that you want to see, and then using that to work backwards to develop the strategies that you'll use to reach that goal. So you can see here down at the bottom where it says impact. Our primary goal is really a garden teacher at every school, which is the last thing listed under systems. Our vision is good quality youth garden education for every Wisconsin child. And so then we went backwards and thought about how to do that. And we ended up developing kind of a two-pronged approach based on the information that you can see there under outcomes, building capacity and building critical mass. And we think of building capacity as making it easier for teachers to do their job, and building critical mass as building a network of youth garden educators and youth garden education programs to increase connectivity and also build power and strengthen our state's identity as a leader in youth garden education. So you can go to the next slide. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the ways that we engage in network building and in capacity building. and this is our map, but I'm going to talk about this more in a minute, but I wanted to show you, we do map all of the programs that we know of in Wisconsin. And this is a colorful representation of the many gardens across our state. Okay, next slide. So we, when we were thinking about what a network is going to be, we thought through a few different possible models. One network model that we talk about is a hub and spokes model. And that's when there's a centralized source of information and that information is disseminated out. We do this to some extent because we produce a newsletter and have other resources. But the problem with this is that if that central hub is no longer there, the network itself completely dissolves. So as I mentioned, we're on a 5-year grant and we didn't want to jeopardize what we were building if there wasn't any formal funding after that 5-year period. Next slide. Another possibility would be a dynamic network model in which all of the organizations or gardens or people in the network are sharing equally with each other. And this is really fantastic if we're talking about well-established SGSOs who all have enough resources and are sharing information with each other so that we're not all reinventing the wheel. But as Sam pointed out, different programs have different levels of engagement. And so this kind of model could leave out a lot of the programs that we are hoping to work with and reach. Next slide. And so we use a hybrid model where there are regional hubs of support, and we work to strengthen connections among those regional hubs of support across the state. And then those regional hubs of support can work to support and connect youth garden education programs in their region. And this just gives a little bit more resiliency to the network model, and also spreads the work out of letting people know that this network of educators and programs exist, and helping people see the things that the network could offer that might be helpful to their program. Next slide. So there are two main activities that we do to strengthen the network. And by strengthen, I mean strengthen the network's self-identity. There's no membership for this network. It's all just if you identify as somebody who participates in these activities. One of the activities we do, as I mentioned, is our school garden map, which now has more than 800 documented youth garden education programs across the state. And we often reach out to programs just to ask, do you have a garden? If we see that there are areas on the map that don't have as many schools listed, but for the most part, this is something that schools self-identify with. So there's a form, we send it out through partners and newsletters, on social media. People see the form, they fill it out, and then they put themselves on the map. This is an interactive map, and so people can actually click on those circles and learn about programs that are in their area, and connect with other educators in their area, which might help them with finding the resources they need, or learning about problems that they've solved that they can solve together, or collaborations that are available. This map is done in ArcGIS. I see a comment in the chat, but we are probably going to transition to Google Maps, which is what we had used in the past. The other big network building, identity building thing that we do in Wisconsin is Wisconsin School Garden Day. And for this, we get a governor's proclamation, that's the word I was searching for, declaring a day the third Thursday in May, because weather-wise, that's the best option in Wisconsin. Declaring the third Thursday in May, Wisconsin School Garden Day. I believe we are the only state that has a dedicated day as proclaimed by our governor. But any state can do it, and you can find our proclamation on our website and use it as a template for your own if you want. And this is another place where we set up the opportunity for people to engage, but it's really up to people to identify this as something they want to do and engage themselves. So we make a guide of suggested resources available, and also make it clear that you can do anything. It's up to you. Celebrate in the way that makes the most sense for your program. That could be germinating seeds in a classroom. It could be building a garden bed. So that's, we've had 3 Wisconsin School Garden Days. They've been really successful. They've grown every year despite school closures and all of that kind of thing. And this is an opportunity for people to also see what's happening around Wisconsin. So we have a hashtag that we use, and it's a great way for people to see the possibilities that are available for how to do activities in your garden and how to celebrate. And we share it on social media so that people can also see what each other is doing. Next slide. Oh, that's just some pictures from Wisconsin School Garden Day. Go ahead. And that was from our very first Wisconsin School Garden Day. So one of the other ways that we use Wisconsin School Garden Day to work towards our theory of change of a garden in every school is thinking about how to engage legislators, because the way to get a garden in every school could be to have legislation supporting it. And so we use Wisconsin School Garden Day as an opportunity to invite legislators to schools, or more appropriately, to have schools invite legislators to visit their gardens. And we help support that, but the initiative really comes from the school. And we've seen, now that we've done this a few times and publicized it, that schools that we don't even know of are inviting local decision makers to their school for Wisconsin School Garden Day and getting that kind of public support for youth garden education. Next slide. And then we also do things that are not at the network building level, but at the capacity building level. So these are things that support the educator or the program at the individual level. We have a searchable resource library on our website. We offer free workshops, a newsletter, and people can visit our map. They don't have to be on our map to have access to it. And we have a free course. And these are all things that, that help make individual programs more sustainable, or can be used for professional development for educators, so that we're supporting the programs as well as the movement in the state. So I think that's all I have. Does anyone have any questions?
So if you have questions, you could either unmute yourself or put them in the chat. While you're formulating your questions, I am going to put in the chat that all the websites that you all shared of your regional support models that support school gardens, I put them all on one page. So they're at SGSO-Network.org/district-run. It's in the chat, but that is a space where you can see examples of your peers and the work that you do. So I had a large list that have nice descriptions, and then I pretty much copied just your URLs and put them on that page. So some of them have descriptions and some don't, but it's kind of nice to look at what your peers are doing as examples.
Thanks, John. So I see a couple of questions. How did you design the free course? So the director of the Wisconsin School Garden Network, Nathan Larson, wrote a book called Teaching in Nature's Classroom, and he teaches the course, and it's based off of that book. So it's a free online course for educators, and it's supported by our grant, and he teaches it through Google Classroom. And I bet there's some people here who have taken, oh, I see. Lindsay says it's a great course. But you can find out more information about it on our website, wischoolgardens.org. And under events, there's a tab for this course. Can you briefly describe what the different colored dots on the map represent? I would love to. John, could you go back a few slides so that we can see the map? Perfect. So we wanted to make sure that people could find the kinds of schools or programs that were most useful to them. And so the color blocks represent regions in Wisconsin so that you can just kind of more easily see who's around you. And then the dots are for different types of programs. So we have early care, elementary, middle, high school, district, because sometimes a school district will have a whole garden program for the district, but not at an individual school. Nonprofit organization, community center, and I think I'm missing one, but you can use, so some of those symbols in the top left corner represent opportunities to filter based on the kind of program that you're interested in viewing. Why are we thinking of switching? So when our program transitions, we will be, the three of the four people who work for Wisconsin School Garden Network will be transitioning to working on a broader farm to school map, or broader farm to school grant that will still support the youth garden work that we're doing. But we probably won't have access to a lot of these programs that we had access to through the university. And also, as related to the question that Zoe just asked in the chat, the Google map could populate itself because we linked it to a Google form, but the ArcGIS map does not populate itself. And so it's also more labor intensive in addition to us no longer having access to the programs. Which is too bad because I love this map, but also it does end up being a fair amount of work to upkeep. Let's see.
And in the chat, I put a link to tools that SGSOs use for running their networks. And this is something we've collected over the years. And mapping is one whole section. And there's ArcGIS and Google Maps shared in there. And it's funny, it's a little bit outdated because it says Wisconsin School Garden Map is on a Google map, but it's actually both. Actually, we have it on both, but
might not be outdated for long. It might come back into
exactly. Just that document, regional networking key activities of SGSOs is all different sort. There might be some outdated link, but it's really a large survey of SGSOs and what they use to actually network, communicate, manage their data, map things. So some examples are there.
I just wanted to follow up on everyone's comments about the course that you guys designed. And I'm doing it too. And it's the best course out there ever. You guys are brilliant. And your integration of all of the different types of technology for interacting is so impressive. And I'm just learning so much, not only content, but like how you can engage people over an online platform. You're doing just great. And I hope you're able to keep offering that or help other networks offer it in their own styles. That could be a whole nother direction to go. Because yeah, I'm taking other courses too, like Life Labs and OSUs, and they are fantastic too, but I think you guys have like set the gold standard at this point. Thank you.
Well, I will pass that on to Nathan. It is definitely his brainchild there to a large extent, with the support and input of many other people. Oh, Erica, my coworker, who's also a teacher in that course, said in the chat the next course begins at the end of January. So you can watch for announcements soon. Registration will open the beginning of January, I believe. And I can put a link to the webpage where the course lives, where the registration lives, and when registration opens, this is where you'll be going.
And will it continue to be free?
my understanding is that, well, it will certainly be free in January. Erica, will it continue to be free after that?
Yeah, I believe that's the goal.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And do you know, I see Bruce mentioned that we have offered the course in Spanish as well. Do you know if that will be happening again?
It's possible if we find out from people that that's something that they're interested in, then I think definitely, because we have the course set up now. And so I think that's definitely something that could happen. We actually have a form that people can fill out if they're interested, where we can kind of collect that information. I could put the link for that too.
Great. Yeah. So if you are interested in the course being offered in Spanish again, definitely let us know. Sounds like if there's enough interest, that's something that we can do in the future. And it sounds like we'll see some of you in the January course.
Great. Well, if there's no more questions about the Wisconsin School Garden Network, which you can still pose those, but I do want to open it up to everyone in our audience. And specifically, I have a question for you. Do you have a tool or a framework that you have successfully used? So we want to hear outcomes of a tool that you've used that work well. So if you have an example, you could just unmute yourself and share how you set up a framework to support multiple school gardens to give us some insight of what's worked well for you.
Well, just the basic annual report to the Board of Trustees for the school district, making that an annual event where people can, each of the gardens can feel celebrated and seen. And then also creating like really basic analog paper posters in the school board office about each of the school gardens so that all the staff and admin get to look at them constantly.
Thank you, Robin.
I work for a nonprofit. Their model's different than like a school district might be, in that we're quite hands-on and very, very programmed. And the way that we manage 18 gardens with standards-based curriculum and growing in 18 gardens is that we're pretty rigid about what we plant, when we plant, and who does what in each garden at each time. We get pushback on some of that from teachers, obviously, and we try to find a balance between really supporting teachers in their opportunities to be creative and individual schools being creative. But the way that we keep our sanity and keep things going is that everybody really kind of has to do everything at the same time in the season. So that's just, it's a model. That's what our model is.
Lindsay, that is a great point that I've recognized doing school gardens for 20 years. There's so much you can do in a school garden that actually giving it guardrails and structure is sometimes beneficial. So if you can teach anything connects to a garden, right? Because everything we do as humans connect to the land, food, social studies, math, science, everything connects to the land. And so if you go and say, we're going to make a curriculum that's based on anything, sometimes we get lost. And the same thing applies to cropping plans, and a lot of teachers don't have the experience as a gardener. And I've seen so many garden educators come to me in the fall with a flat of, pumpkins and like, we want to grow these pumpkins. It's October, and like, So if we had a district-wide planting calendar, that just eliminates one challenge that new gardeners face. So I like hearing your example there. And if we start with success, then people could then go out and evolve to, trying new things. So yep. I really like that example. And Robin, when you shared the idea of having consistent feedback to your school board, it reminded me of some work that we did this last spring. The way that SGSOs share their impacts, we have a really strong collection of examples, and you can search through the web link that I just put in the chat of the way folks share reports and other elements such as newsletters and such.
I should say, John, that we just graduated our founding school of 15 years ago. Our first school has just decided to graduate on and be more creative in how they garden and how they teach. And I'm really curious to watch and see how that goes with them outside of that highly structured program that we provide.
That will be interesting to see, and hopefully they have a strong culture to keep going. So we will continue with just share outs of peer-to-peer sharing, but I do want to remind those that have to leave here at the top of the hour that we do have a survey. It's at bit.ly/SGSO-feedback, and we love your feedback because we use that to plan our future webinars and let our presenters know how things were taking place. So I just want to open it up again to folks that are here to unmute yourself. One, share about your framework or successes, or in particular, any of these activities that are on the screen of successes, because these are the activities that our registrants suggested they wanted to learn about. And so I'll start out by sharing management and maintenance of school gardens. That is something that is always a challenge. And some different ways we've done that to support our district school gardens was partner with college interns, and we created a garden crew. College interns want to learn and do things in school gardens. So we recruit, 3 to 5 college interns per semester to work with us and join us in our work days. So it just amplifies the work that we're able to do. And so if you do have service learning high school students or a college that has internships, consider making a partnership with them to assist you in that maintenance. A lot of other folks talked about summer planning, and I have a nice article and examples of that I'll put in the chat. But does anybody else have any examples of the way they manage maintenance of multiple school gardens that they could share out?
I could just share the model that we use. I run 7 gardens. And so each of the gardens has a garden liaison who's a school teacher or school employee. And that person coordinates generally with like a sign-up genius to invite parents to come in. And they also, depending on the school, will offer like a Wednesday check-in where the garden liaison will go to the garden every Wednesday. So if parents want to come on Wednesday to ask any questions or to like have a play date with their kids, which was especially important these past 2 summers. But they've used Sign Up Genius, they've used some other apps, they've used like school-based PTO networks to essentially recruit in, and that's how we manage mostly in the summertime. The garden educators tend to manage during the school year. So that's our model.
Great. And there's so many great online tools now to coordinate and get people together. So Sign Up Genius is a great example of that.
So one of the things that I'm starting to do, because our schools are struggling, I guess, even more than they did last year, is I'm falling back to after school garden clubs for maintenance. And they tend to have a very high attendance just because the parents aren't off of work yet and they're using it as babysitting. And so we're splitting it up different grade levels and getting more teachers who are willing to sponsor those clubs, but not willing to give up their TEAC time, because we've also got House Bill 4545 that's stressing them out more. So they don't give up class time as easily. But the after school stuff is working right now, and hopefully we'll switch back to in the classroom later.
That's a great example. We take advantage of after school class programming as well and rotate kids through garden time, and it's a way more flexible time frame than doing it in instruction time to get kids actually doing gardening. So we just have a few more minutes. So we've been talking about maintenance. There are some other activities here on this chart of what folks were interested in learning about. I want to just pose to you all, do any of you guys have professional learning communities or PLCs where you pull together your garden educator type folks? I'd love to hear about how that operates if you have any professional learning communities related to gardening or outdoor ed.
So in Crescent City, it's not necessarily so formal, but we do have a program here or a group here, a grassroots group that has emerged, our local permaculture guild. And they provide a lot of support for garden training, gardeners, interest in doing all kinds of types of workshops and that sort of thing. For my summer camp program that I ran through the summer, I was able to pull from that group of professionals to come and lead an activity at the summer camp. And so it made the summer camp really robust because they saw people from our community teaching about topics that they were passionate and experts in, things like keeping bees or soil composition. You know, they turned some of those boring topics into really engaging things because they're people that we know right here from our community.
Thanks for sharing.
I'll jump in from Portland, Maine. At the Portland Public School District, we've been really focused on moving forward a model of like what we call a special, some people call it essentials, or just essentially having a garden and food class in the school, a teacher that's specifically hired for that. And through ESSER funding, we have 4 schools that have created that model this year, which is really exciting. And I'll just say that a drawback that I didn't expect is that they created these positions as ed techs instead of teachers. And I think that there's like a really big benefit to the accessibility of an ed tech position. But the drawback is not having the full teacher contract. So we've had some trouble forming a PLC, but are getting started in December. We've figured out how to get that, find a gap in everyone's schedule that works because they don't get paid for any like not in school hours, which has been really a drawback of the ed tech model. So yeah.
Thanks. There is continued dialogue in the chat. So if anyone has any answers to the questions in there, like collaboration with Ag in the Classroom. I know that we in California, Ag in the Classroom is a big supporter of school gardens, and we collaborate with them by going to share school garden topics at their conferences. So that's one way we collaborate with Ag in the Classroom in California. I love seeing that folks collaborate with CTE, Career Technical Education courses. That is a really strong collaboration that you can make in your school garden work, whether they're youth-based gardens or horticulture training programs or culinary programs. I've seen all of those being kind of career technical, job training programs that use horticulture or culinary skills as a base. So really great programming to look into, and there's usually funds associated with those programs, and I've seen a lot of staff funded to run culinary or horticulture type classes.
Yeah, I was the one who added that. So I just started this new position in August, and I don't have too much to add because I'm mostly soaking up a lot of information and orienting myself. But this position, my title is Experiential Learning Specialist. So what it's kind of allowing me to do is to work on the school gardens at all of the schools within the district here in Lawrence, Kansas. But since I'm also helping with work-based learning opportunities in the CTE classes, there's a lot of like overlap that can happen, which is pretty exciting.
Great. Well, we are coming to the end of our time, and honestly, I have to run out to go visit the middle school garden. So I am going to use this time to close out and remind you to visit our survey and go to our SGSO-Network.org page and check out our promising practices. Many of the resources that we're talking about today are all documented there from other folks like yourselves sharing the work that they do. So thanks for all of you that stuck on till the very end. Hopefully you got some new inspiration and ideas to continue your work, and we'll see you in the new year. It's looking that in January and February, we're going to be doing 2 webinars related to what researchers and academics in our universities are doing to share and learn about school gardens. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you online or at the next webinar, and maybe in Denver in April at the first ever National School Garden Conference. Thanks for joining us.